Welcome to the World Cup mood board, 99.94. England now hold the Unified World Cup. And Matthew Mott, their coach, holds World Cups in two different genders at the same time. Play the bumper. I thought there was going to be highlights there, but there wasn't. And here I am, back on the show. For those of you too young to remember, and this is YouTube, so I'm assuming you're all 8. Think about all those years, think about it. You wouldn't be able to think about it. You may not know about all those years where England were an absolute shambles of a white ball team. In fact, for those who don't know, they actually actively shunned the white ball for generations. It's one of the reasons that Dukes probably don't have a really good white ball, is because England kept playing with a red ball into the late 90s. I'd have to check my notes. Was 97 off the top of my head was the last time that England used a red ball and white in one-day cricket. By that stage, the whole world was playing white ball cricket. That was after the original boom of, I suppose, Australia, and then what Sri Lanka had done, and then almost it was at the time of Australia's second boom, and not to mention South Africa as well. And at that stage, England just didn't really have much of an idea outside of brief moments, sort of Adam Hollyoake-esque. England weren't playing the same format as everyone else, but weirdly enough, as they did move into white ball cricket and as they did start to put coloured clothes on, things did start to change just a little bit. And what started to happen was, first, T20 cricket came along. And that was obviously a marketing gimmick by English cricket, but it did mean that their players are looking at white ball cricket slightly differently. They then also had the Pro 40. If one day I'll probably have to do a deep dive on, the Pro 40 and how much it helped a lot of these different players. But when you talk to them, quite often they talk about that as being something that really changed their mindset. And a lot of those guys who played Pro 40 cricket were actually, are still involved with the England team at the moment. On top of all that, they've also had the 16.4 cricket, right? And, a lot of 50 over cricket. So for a nation that really shunned white ball cricket, they suddenly had 4 different genres of it over a period of 10 to 15 years. And they did start to take it seriously. And when they start to take it seriously, of course, it's after the 2015 World Cup. Owen Morgan is a big part of that. Trevor Bayliss as a white ball specialist coach, and also probably the elevation of Nathan Lehman from sort of a regular analyst to something probably a little bit more than that. And those 3 people all bring very different things that essentially led England from being a 23-year embarrassment in limited overs cricket to one of the best teams in the world. And it happened almost as quickly as as they bat. But the original plan, when you look back at English one-day or limited overs cricket in general, was a little bit monosyllabic. You know what I mean? It was see ball, hit ball, and hopefully your bowlers will take a few wickets. It meant that when they got to Cardiff for that 2017 Champions Trophy semi-final against Pakistan, there was a used wicket there. But forget the whole nonsense about used wicket. They just didn't adapt to the conditions at all because they were not really thinking about cricket, I think, perhaps in the right way at that time. So since that, they've actually built a lot, and they now have multiple ways that they win white ball games. And you could see that by them embracing Milan. And it took them a long time to embrace Milan because Milan didn't play the way that the rest of the players did. And you can also see with the way that Stokes is being turned more and more into an anchor, that England have actually really developed beyond just the team that hits the ball really hard, but they still hit the ball really hard, right? They still have a longer batting lineup than everyone else, but they also have multiple ways of going about it. And if you look at this World Cup, we've been saying for almost a month now, I don't know how long this World Cup's gone on, less than that, 3 weeks, that this has been a real problem-solving World Cup. If you look at the UAE didn't give you a lot of different problems. Essentially, every pitch was more or less fairly similar. The conditions were fairly similar outside of that. And, the toss and the dew, they all sort of played a part, but you knew what was going to happen. If you look at this particular one, you had, very different wickets in probably Tasmania, Melbourne, and even Geelong at times. They were early season when you don't usually play high-level competitive cricket in Australia in that part of, that time of the year. Sydney was a batting paradise, and it sort of fell apart. Brisbane had its own issues. Perth Stadium basically turned into the Wacker. It was almost volatile, that pitch at times. And so you did have all these different things. So it did mean that this was a little bit more like even for a World Cup, which always have that level of problem solving, there were more problems that needed to be solved than normal. And if England had turned up, well, actually, England did kind of turn up, if you look at them early on, preparing just to whack everything for six. And by the end of the tournament, that's not what they're doing, right? We saw them do it against India, but then against Pakistan, they played differently again. And if you look at that loss against Ireland, which is now really interesting, that was probably a failure for them to adapt to the conditions. So England, even throughout this tournament, have been changing the way that they play a little bit. And the thing about them is that they... a lot of their reputation as a white ball team really comes from ODI cricket, where they were absolutely extraordinary. But if in T20 cricket we kind of hadn't quite seen the best. I think if you look at the last 3 World Cups, it would be very hard to argue that they've not been the best team overall. 2016, they went within a couple of balls of winning that one. In 2021, they turned up with, they ended up by the end of the tournament losing about 4 or 5 players out of their squad, and still, made it to the semi-finals. And perhaps if Daryl Mitchell holds out early on there, they might have got through the final and done something there as well. And then, of course, in this tournament as well, the weird sort of start. It felt like they weren't even in the tournament to begin with, because we only saw a little bit against Ireland. They didn't even play that long against Afghanistan in that particular game. And then the game got washed out against Melbourne. And so, against Australia in Melbourne. And so we didn't see, that team that we had seen over a long period of time. But even when you look at the records, they weren't the dominant T20I team over the last 6 or so years, right? They've been building, they've been trying things, and all those different trying things and maybe not getting on the long runs that India and Pakistan have in that time. India and Pakistan basically perfected different formats of play, whereas England have continued to challenge themselves, tried new players in new roles. I mean, they even turned up in this World Cup with Sam Curran in a position, and probably even Ben Stokes in positions that they really hadn't played before, but they worked with them beforehand to ensure that they were ready for that. And if you look at the difference between these two sides, Pakistan had one extreme skill set, one that was absolutely brilliant and realistically kept them in this game for far longer than they probably should have been. Even with Shaheen's knee, and you can even mention Fakhar Zaman's injury in going home, they still almost pulled off this. But England, now twice in the last 2 World Cups, have played without... England have won the last 2 World Cups in one-day cricket and T20 cricket by playing off-brand style of cricket, right? When they beat New Zealand at Lords, it wasn't really the England ODI cricket that we're used to. And in beating Pakistan again today, that was a scrappier, different kind of win than you would expect. And then you throw in the fact that England didn't have Jofra Archer, Johnny Bairstow, Dawid Malan and Reece Topley. It's kind of remarkable what they've been able to do, and to be able to change from being a 23-year laughingstock in limited overs cricket. It's probably unfair to say white ball cricket because they weren't always playing it, but in white ball cricket, to go from that to being the first team ever to unify the 2 World Cups. If you'd have told me that in 2014, I would have laughed until I vomited on you, right? If you would have said to me in 2014 that England is going to be, from next year onwards, is going to be the most dominant team in limited overs cricket for a long period of time. I remember covering them in 2015 at that World Cup when they were playing Scotland. And I think Preston Mompson and Kyle Kutzer were at the crease and were knocking the ball around. And we were sitting there in the press box going, if Scotland don't lose another wicket for about another 6 or 8 overs here, they're in a really good chance of winning this game. That wasn't even the Scotland that began. That was like the start of Scotland's run, when they weren't even anywhere near as strong a team, a completely amateur team. And you go from that to where we are now, of them winning these 2 World Cups. It is absolutely remarkable. And the other thing I would say is, if we're being brutally honest about England, and you can count the last 4 World Cups, if you want, 2016, 2019, 2021, and now 2022. I don't actually think we've seen the best of English cricket at any of those World Cups so far. Does that mean that the next one they're going to come out and smash everyone? Maybe not. But they managed to win 2 with injuries, with obstacles, and with with having to change their actual plan. It's been just a bizarre time. And for someone as old as me, who grew up literally laughing every time England played a limited overs game, to come through to here, the change and the revolution and the rebuilding and everything else has just been one of the most amazing stories in cricket. And part of the reason that people don't like talking about it too much is why, it's England. It was unsexy for a long time, and even when they were doing well, it was unsexy. And even then, in 2016, when they looked really good, Carlos Brathwaite comes along. And then in 2017, they had that horrendous game against Pakistan at Wales. And since then, they've won 2 out of 3 World Cups. And I don't think I ever would have been in a position to think that England would win 2 out of 3 World Cups. And here we are. Let's get on to the players involved. Adil Rashid bowled a wicket maiden in a T20 World Cup final. This is a player who was shunned by English cricket for a very, very long time. I remember him playing in a game, I think it was against Australia at the Oval, in a one-day game in 2008 or 9. It might have been 2009. And I remember him playing really, really well and thinking he batted really well and he bowled not too bad as well in that particular game. I think there's a lot of future here. And England dropped him, I think, a game or two later. He was just out of the side. And it never really made sense. And I remember for years I would ask people in English cricket about Adil Rashid and, distinguished, famous England former players, writers, broadcasters would say things like, "Oh, he's a roller. He doesn't have what he needs to get by." And to watch him again dominate for England when they really needed him was absolutely incredible. And he hasn't really had the best tournament. I think his figures, because he hasn't taken a lot of wickets, we've slept on him a little bit more than we should have. But even so, there were times, we had a question on Wagon Wheel or on one of the World Cup mood boards not that long ago about, is he the same bowler that he used to be? He looked pretty handy today. When it came on in the 8th over, Pakistan were already in a little bit of trouble, of course. They made it to 45 for 1. And Mohammad Harris could barely get bat on ball. More on that later. And he decided to attack Rashid. First ball, got nowhere near the middle of the bat and humped it down to long on for an easy catch to Ben Stokes. But then in his third over, Pakistan were at 84 for 2. But they had taken 16 runs off the previous 2 overs. And it looked like, I think it was just, what was that? It was just after that 10 over period where it looked like they were, making a bit of a push. And Rashid pretty much ended that particular push. He took a wicket with the first ball of his over, which was a googly to Babar Azam, and a very good athletic caught and bowled as well. And then he bowled 5 dots to Iftikhar to get the wicket maiden. It's a remarkable effort from a wrist spinner. I mean, that was not, I thought, both the wrist spinners bowled very well, but that was not a pitch for, where... It's not a pitch where you want to turn to the spinners because it was doing so much for the seamers and there was a little bit there. And yet, in that particular situation, he was just masterful and I thought completely the difference. If you look at what he had done in this tournament as well, Rashid, whether this was about form, whether this was about conditions, he'd actually started to move wider against the crease. His release against India was 17 centimeters wider than it was against Afghanistan. And today was the slowest that he bowled. So you're talking about a proper, masterly level leg spinner at that point. The ability to be able to do that, especially in high pressure situation. I think he said at the halfway mark that he didn't go out there thinking he was going to bowl slower either. So you're talking about, proper control of your art from Adil Rashid in that way. And in the last 3 must-win games, he has figures of 12 overs, 1 maiden. It's always fun to read. 4 for 58. So he's been absolutely extraordinary just at the time of the tournament where England, basically, if he hadn't have been as good as he was, they're probably not the champions at the moment. And it's also worth talking about Sam Curran. We know, we've talked about it a lot on this show, almost from the first time he did it, about how England have come in with him as a death bowler. arguably because they didn't have anyone else, and they wanted that deeper batting lineup. I'm not really sure how he ended up getting that role. It'd be really interesting to have a chat with him and see how it came about. And yet he's gone on to be. Someone sent me a message today saying he should be player of the tournament. I'm not sure he should be player of the tournament, but you make a very, very good argument that he was the most important player for the team that went on to win. Adil Rashid, obviously very important on the back end. Then Ben Stokes played the 2 innings, even if they were slow innings, they were the innings that crawled them into the finals, and then that one there. And then of course you've got the 2 openers who smashed the ball around a little bit a couple of times. But Sam Curran was absolutely incredible. And today he bowled 4 overs and going for 12 runs. And he took the wickets of Rizwan and Shan Masood and also Mohammad Nawaz. So 2 of the 3 anchors he dismissed. Took him to 13 wickets for the tournament. Only Hasaranga has more, and obviously Hasaranga played more games than him. England brought him on and made him. This is the. This is the video that we made about him beforehand, but I just want to show how much he has changed and how little he had bowled at the death beforehand. So Muku, can you play the Sam Curran video, please? Bowling at the death in this tournament like he has never done before. He's delivered more at the end in this World Cup than he ever has at any other period of his career. Essentially, England has flipped his normal bowling pattern. Traditionally, he's bowled 45% of his overs in the power play and then just under a third in the middle, with a quarter at the death. Now it's almost 50% at the death with even splits in the other parts of the game. England have inverted Sam Curran. It's obviously still incredibly small sample size, but there aren't that many bowlers who've actually delivered 42 balls in the last 6 overs of a match at this World Cup. But who would have assumed that Sam Curran would be doing so well on this, or literally on it at all? And just to go slightly deeper than data, I wanted to show you some things. Whereas before, when he was bowling on the length, it was often to swing the ball. Now when he does that, it's for his slower balls. You can see that he has good revs, and this appears to actually deviate just a little bit, which is helpful as his cutters will go away from right-handers. But he's also bowling a lot of accurate back of the length at the body, using his left arm angle to stop players from getting a good swing at the ball, and his accuracy means he doesn't often get it wrong. And then this is him going full. You can see that he's unafraid of over-pitching at times. It's full, it's straight, very old school you miss, I hit. Just one thing I wanted to add to this. So we talked about earlier on in that video, I didn't want to play too much of it because some of you have probably already seen it, but we talked about earlier on in that video about how he hasn't bowled many wide Yorkers, and he's not particularly known for bowling wide Yorkers, if we're being honest. But it's not something that he's done, which a lot of left-arm bowlers obviously do bowl a lot of wide Yorkers. The interesting thing I found about that was that today he did bowl quite a few again. So it's not just that he's got like a very dogmatic method. It's that he's actually, he's got a very good method. He's obviously a very accurate bowler and a very smart bowler, but he's also willing to improvise when he's out there. I just thought it was really, really interesting. And we talk a lot about the big risks that England take when they're batting, you know, taking players on, hitting against the spin, trying to hit sixes, all these sorts of things that they do. And that's a huge risk. Bringing a guy in who, in the IPL, bowls in the power play, for Surrey, bowls a little bit at the death, you know, hasn't done it before for England, certainly hasn't done it before at a World Cup, was actually injured for the last World Cup. You know, he's a medium fast bowler. He's not express, obviously, in any way. And to get him to bowl at the death, I just think that's a huge risk, especially going into a World Cup final, especially considering that last time they made Ben Stokes do that and it went completely the other way. I think it just shows that, you know, they are better at preparing their players for certain things. And also, I think compared to some sides, I do get the feeling that England just like, well, that's the job that this person is in the side for, and they're going to get a good go at it. Although, to be fair to Sam Curran, he got the entire World Cup at it. No real preparation before then. But I do get the feeling that that's the way that they do things. And, you know, that goes back to, I suppose, to Morgan and Bayliss as much as anything. But the other side of that, of course, is that, you know, Nathan Lehman and the other analysts as well, they've been pushing for a long time to have that, you know, endlessly long batting lineup. And that's what they wanted. And with Sam Curran coming in next, He would have been next, wouldn't he? Yeah, I think he was due in next, or him or Wokes would have been in next, but probably Sam would have come in before him. Again, it gives them just a huge bonus. If you can get a death bowler who has batting, that's why Chris Morris used to go for so much money. That's why Dwayne Bravo used to go for so much money. That's why David Visa has been so popular over the last couple of years. And England being able to manufacture one on the fly from someone who doesn't profile as that. It's remarkable. Let's talk about the methodical side of England a little bit here, actually. I did a matchups video beforehand, and one of the things that I talked about in the matchup video was that Mohammad Rizwan had a good record against Adil Rashid. And if you look today, what England actually did is they waited for Rizwan before they brought in Rashid. And when they brought Rashid on, he had a double positive matchup. We don't know much about Mohammad Harris, but from the little data England would have had, they would have thought that leg spin was a very good option against him. And obviously, Adil Rashid has a good record against Baba Azam as well. So if you just come to the Mohammad Harris thing before, he actually lived up to exactly this. So this was the graph that we did on Friday. Yeah, it must have been Friday now. And we know that he could smack right arm seam everywhere. Let me just move that out of the way so you can see right arm seam there. And we know that he could do that, and that wasn't a problem. But because he's playing against England and they have so much variety in their attack, it meant that he was always going to have to go up against everyone else. And if you have a look at him today, you could see he made runs against Wokes and Stokes, so the two right arm seamers. Didn't score a run off the 4 balls he faced off Sam Curran, and was dismissed off his first ball off Adil Rashid. So that was that sort of thing. And when we're talking about England, it was Owen Morgan was talking about Joss Butler's captaincy. I think it might have been the New Zealand game, after the New Zealand game, and someone threw to him, along the lines of Joss Butler's not quite as matchup dependent as you are. And Owen Morgan was really, really into the matchups. And, there's a lot of cricketers who are like that. Obviously, MS Dhoni's another one. Some of them do it kind of from their head. Other people do it from the paperwork, whichever way it comes from. At times in this tournament, I thought Joss Butler wasn't completely on board with following that. But by the end, I did get the feeling that he was completely following it. And if you go to... This was the other sheet, one of the other things we showed, that England had 2 positive bowling matchups today. And that was Baba versus Rashid. Obviously, Rashid got him. And the other one was Rizwan versus Curran. Rizwan was dismissed by Curran today. When you go into a game like this and you have 2 positive bowling matchups and both of them come off, it's a huge boom, right? It's not guaranteed. All you're really doing, and all England are trying to do when they do things like this, is put things marginally more in their favor. I think a lot of people, when they don't like matchups, they think that it's like, oh, he's coming on and he's got a bowling average of 8 against this person, but this guy's just smashed him for 30 runs over 5 overs. And so he can't possibly, the matchup can't possibly work. That's not what England are trying to do. They're trying to continually just put themselves slightly ahead. And I thought with both of these matchups today, I thought they did that. But there's also just a little bit of luck involved, right? When it comes down to it, any other day that may not have just come across. It's not like Baba was averaging 10 against Rashid and that Rizwan was always getting out to him. It's just that they both had slightly positive records, and in the final, unfortunately for Pakistan, they both went against them. The other thing that I thought that England did really well is once Pakistan's 2 biggest run scorers had gone specifically, they just played the dimensions of the field really well. And we've got a video on that Muku is going to play for us right now. Look at where the fielder was standing in this particular... Oh. So look at where the fielder was standing in this particular situation. He is nowhere near the boundary. This is even a long way in for the MCG, where teams often do this. And you can see that when Liam Livingstone actually goes on to take the catch, he doesn't have to run, despite the fact that he's, 30 meters from the boundary by the time it comes down. And this obviously didn't just happen once. It happened twice. In fact, I would say with the Nawaz one, he was even more in position than he was with Shan Masood. England didn't invent anything here. This is something that teams do at the MCG. But we never saw the ball fly over their heads, and they just kept having their fielders in the right areas so often. And that's kind of, what they do when it comes to the way that they play the field. They would have spent a lot of time with that. If you had a look at Pakistan, oh, actually, forget Pakistan because they saw a little bit of England. But if you had a look at some of the other teams playing at the MCG at times in this tournament, they were sort more of what you would say a traditional 5 to 10 meters off. When you're 5 to 10 meters off the MCG, essentially teams can still run twos to you all the time. And what England did was they pressured Pakistan a little bit more, so that they basically had to go for the big hit or just take the single. It's just little things like that that show how methodical England is as a team. And also, I think just again to go back to that, the talk from before, I think they've just taken a lot of steps forward from 2016 through to now. And those are the sorts of little differences before. And we know a lot more about T20 cricket as well. And so we can, pick up these sorts of things that we might have missed in earlier tournaments. I just want to talk about the anchors, because this has been the World Cup of the anchors. Probably not something for the ICC to market specifically. And Pakistan, of course, are a triple anchor setup. By bringing in Shaheen Masood, they went with another version there. And considering that the other two failed so many times, especially early in the tournament, it worked. Even though Pakistan lost against India and Zimbabwe. In fact, Pakistan lost against India, Zimbabwe, and England, and I think Shaheen Masood was, probably their best batter in almost all of those games. So that bringing that insurance with them and with the way that they play certainly backs that up. The problem with anchors, of course, is that the more traditional form of anchor is to play around a runner ball and then try and catch up. And the problem is that you can't always catch up, and sometimes you get dismissed. And any player can fail early, whether you're an anchor or a more attacking player. That's obviously a normal part of the game. But being dismissed when you face 15 or 28 balls and you're not scoring much better than a runner ball means that the rest of the team really have to score from the remaining 2/3 of the game. And, there's a million different visuals I could show you on this, but this is Pakistan's average by batting position over the last 2 years. The opening position average is 45, and there's two of them. And you can just see how little runs they've been able to get out of some of the other positions throughout the lineup. Now, some of that is just because those guys are coming in further into the innings so often, and they're playing far more attacking cricket. But if you actually do start to have a look at it as well, I know that, Mohammad Haris we still don't know how good he can be. We know what his roof could be, because when you can hit the ball and face high level pace the way he does, you should have a very high ceiling. But we don't know where he might drop if he can't handle the rest of the bowling types, as he has struggled briefly in his career so far. If you look at someone like Iftikhar, we know that Iftikhar is a limited batter, perfectly suited to Australian conditions, and batted brilliantly at times in this World Cup, even in the warm-up before the World Cup. But we still know that he's not, a very top-level batter at this level. And then, one of their other top-order players, of course, is Shaheen. And if, he has improved so much, and I still think he can become a batter. But outside of that year in 2020, when he almost averaged 40 in T20 cricket, you're talking about just a couple of years there on either side of averaging 20. They rely so heavily, it's not just the fact that you are talking about the fact their openers making a huge percentage of runs. We're looking at domestic numbers here as well. And even within the domestic numbers for players like Iftikhar and Shaheen, they're not consistent high-level scorers in T20 cricket. And you've got Nawaz, of course, who would be the other player there as well, who I think has been a slightly better batter traditionally, but I think he averaged 20 in T20 cricket this year as well. And so, and if you look at the runs tonight, I've got the three anchors on the right, even though Shaheen scored slightly more than Rizwan, in case that confuses you when you look up. But you can certainly see there that, of the three anchors, only one of them, or three anchors scored almost 2/3 of their runs. But outside of Shaheen Masood, none of them particularly batted quickly. I thought Shaheen Afridi actually was batting probably, at the top sort of end of what he could bat early on in the innings. Unfortunately, he didn't get to kick on the way he would have. But the other batters, so there's two ways of looking at it from Pakistan's point of view. The other batters didn't actually make the runs that they needed, but also that the anchors took up a lot of balls without actually putting on a lot of runs. And so it was almost that combination of those two things that I think really cost them a little bit tonight. But I think the most interesting thing is we move on to the England anchors, is that tonight, and perhaps at times in this tournament, it was England's anchors that were really, really important. So England came into this tournament with probably one traditional anchor in Dawid Malan, and then two other sort of what we would say are non-traditional anchor style players. I would have said in the Milan's case, about 12 overs into this game, I was thinking to myself that groin injury could be the most important small news item around, because they looked like they just needed someone who could chip the ball for them. But of course, that went to someone else. The first anchor really is, or that unorthodox anchor, is Josh Buttler, just because he scores so very fast, but also holds batting lineups together. We've seen that for England, but we've also seen that for Rajasthan in the IPL as well, and back in the old days for Somerset and Lancashire as well. If he'd have made it to the 10 over mark today, he would have taken such a chunk out of it. And he does bat even though he has a great strike rate, he does bat very long. But obviously that didn't happen today. So Ben Stokes became their anchor. And if you look at Ben Stokes' T20 career, I did a video a couple of years ago, or last year perhaps, on how he never really found a role in T20 cricket when you compare him to someone like Curran Pollard, who very early on worked out his role and nailed it. And then that was what Curran Pollard did, with slight tweaks to it when it was needed. That's not really been Stokes' case. And if you look at his batting in his career, he's played as a late innings power player and hasn't really worked for him. A middle order aggressor at times, again, didn't quite fit what he was good at. And we've seen him open and top three a little bit as well, in more of a, I suppose, traditional kind of anchor way. And now we're seeing this new middle order anchor version of Ben Stokes. And Butler has talked a lot about wanting Ben Stokes for this side, even though everyone knew he wasn't a great player by T20 numbers. But everyone knows that he is still Ben Stokes. And that argument also goes back to Australia. A lot of people in this particular World Cup were saying, Australia have got to stop using Pat Cummins and Mitchell Starc, kind of forgetting that in the last World Cup, they used that as well, and that won. Teams still err on the side of talent. And I think Ben Stokes just showed why that was the case. I think that his most obvious role probably was going to be if the team was fully fit, would have been replacing Dawid Malan and batting at number 3. But when they got out here for this particular tournament, they didn't have Bairstow, and also it looked like a tournament that someone like Dawid Malan actually could have been quite handy in. And so what they did was they carved out this role where he essentially took Bairstow's spot, I assume, in the batting order, and then with the ball, they gave him a very comfy ride. There were games where he would bowl the first over and the 7th over, which traditionally are the easiest overs to bowl in T20 cricket. He got the ball when it was swinging, so that's something that that makes him a lot more threatening as a bowler. And it also meant he didn't have to worry about trying to work out the back end of T20 cricket, which he hasn't been particularly good at, and neither is he in one-day cricket either. So in the end, they probably came here, England, with a team that was going to hit, but suddenly through Stokes, they ended up with an anchor that they could really trust. And if you look at the semi-final, not semi-final, what would you call it? The quarterfinal against Sri Lanka, I suppose. You could see again, his ability to he has an almost mechanical ability to find singles automatically in tough situations. You can almost see he looks at the ball differently at different times of the game, and he has this ability to almost block balls for singles repeatedly in tough situations. If Headingley, the Lord's final, the Sri Lanka game, and here, all those different areas where he has certain skills that the other England batters just don't have. He can gear up and down. Sometimes I would say he's a bit mechanical with the way he does that. He's either batting in 7th gear or he's batting, with a handbrake on. But he still has those skills within that. And today, he basically had Moeen Ali and Josh Butler did the hitting that was more than enough to get that total down to less than a run a ball. And they lopped the top and the bottom off of that, essentially. And so Stokes just had to hold it together when the Pakistan bowlers looked too good for pretty much every other batter that they had, right? So if you have a look at that big, you can see he starts very, very slow here. And then he has that big period until about the 34th ball, where he's really not scoring much at all. He was 21 off 31 at one stage. And at that point, you're flirting with a match-losing innings. Let's be honest. And it was I think it was his 35th ball, or actually it was around this period anyway, where Iftikhar came on with a surprise over because of Shaheen's injury, which we'll talk about in a little while. And what happens is you get to 21 off 31 and you get to 28 off 35, and then you get a ball that you over attack. And in that particular case, he could have easily holed out. Instead, it falls just short. And what does he do? He catches up in the next two balls, essentially, with two boundaries. And those two boundaries are really the difference that get England going. And then Moeen Ali cashes in on it the next over. It was what is remarkable about what Stokes did is that Pakistan came into this game with three proper anchor players, and England essentially didn't come in with any traditional ones. Certainly not people who would be considered that way by anyone outside of me, perhaps, but also not players who had played it year on year on year. And suddenly Ben Stokes just works out that job because it's required for England and gets them home again. And as I said, you can go back to the 2019 World Cup and you could see some of the play that he did in that final as well. It's not the first time we've seen him do this, but it's not like a normal Ben Stokes innings either. His ability to find different gears when required is one of his main skills as a batter. The other thing that is worth mentioning now is just how remarkable Ben Stokes has been in the highest pressure moments. I mean, we've been saying it for a very long time, even before maybe at times it was completely warranted. But if you look back now at England's most important innings in Test cricket, ODI cricket, and T20 cricket over the last, 5 or so years, Ben Stokes has all of them. And he doesn't have a super high average in any of them. And he doesn't come into any of these tournaments or series as the world's number one batter or anything like that. But his ability to play in very tough circumstances and change his game so dramatically to suit what he needs to do is absolutely remarkable. Hopefully England, there's an international format of T10 or the 100, so he can get another 100 and add to that remarkable record he's had. But it does show again just how good England is at just changing their game when required, which hasn't always been their strength. But let's move on to Pakistan. Shaheen Afridi was certainly thought to be one of the world's best bowlers well before this tournament, but there were times in this tournament where he wasn't bowling at quite the level that we were hoping for, there was that injury seemed to be haunting him just a little bit coming in. Although then when he did start to get going, he took a lot of wickets. Today, interestingly enough, it looked like it might have been a better pitch for Naseem, Wasim, Harris, those sorts of bowlers. But yet still, it was Shaheen who showed he was just, I don't know if he was too quick or too skillful, but if you look back at Alex Hale's shot, he's just in no position to play a cricket shot at that ball. His head fell over, and that's because of the swing. But he got completely trapped because of the pace of the ball and the length of the ball, and it was just remarkable. Weirdly enough, the other wicket of Harry Brook actually helped win England the game because his strike rate of 87 with Ben Stokes was actually dragging them back. But that catch was taken by Shaheen Afridi. And Brook absolutely smashed that. I don't know if we've talked about this much on this channel yet, but there's something that England cricketers talk about a lot, which is a power fade. And you can sometimes see it if the camera's in the right spot, but you can see it when you're at the ground. England players, and Buttler was one of the first ones, but you could certainly see it with Phil Salt and some of the other guys, that they hit down through the ball almost more like a golfer. And when the ball goes, it goes flat and then it starts to fade off. I think that was what Harry Brooke did on that particular ball to Shaheen Afridi, who took what was a hard catch, although probably looked slightly easier on the cameras, and then managed to injure his knee in doing so. He got into such a bizarre position where he sort of twisted over on himself. And from that moment, Moeen Ali comes in and he scores a lot quicker than Brooke, and Shaheen Afridi obviously can only bowl one more over. One more ball, I should say. He actually went off the ground briefly, and as he was walking around the boundary, he was walking with the physio, and he was trying to stretch his knee, and the physio was like, "Don't do that." And so at that point, you could see that Shaheen was certainly going to try and bowl with the pain, but the physio had already worked out that I would assume his old injury had come back, but if not, something fresh had happened that was really going to cause him some problems there. So it's a ligament injury inside of his knee that he got in Sri Lanka in July. He didn't play in the Asia Cup, and we just don't know what actually happened in that particular situation. So he went off the field for an over. And his return was massively cheered by the Pakistani crowd when he came back out. But you could see when he came back in, he came back on to bowl, and England were 97 for 4 with 41 needed from 30 balls. So the game was right there for Pakistan at that stage. And he pulled out of delivering that first ball. And at that stage, it's very rare if you can't get through that first ball that it works. You do see sometimes injured bowlers go through. Maybe my favorite memory was when Elise Perry bowled in a World Cup, what turned out to be a broken leg. But she ran through for the first ball and pulled out. But generally, that's when you know, because until that moment and you're running in, you actually don't know how the injury is going to hold up or hold you back. So he bowled the first ball. It's a bit of a wide one, and he got away with it. But that was it, and that was a huge moment for England and Pakistan. And Shaheen might have bowled the rest of the game, and it may not have made a huge difference between the two sides. And Iftikhar coming on, as I said, almost got that surprise wicket of Ben Stokes, but then there was the couple of boundaries at the end that did actually change things. And from that moment onwards, I think Pakistan's spirit looked a little bit broken. Just the idea that they couldn't throw the ball back to Shaheen seemed to really bother them. And then obviously the over after Iftikhar's over was hit for 16. And that was when the game was pretty much over. Although, having seen everything that has happened to Mohammad Nawaz in this tournament, I'm very glad that he didn't end up bowling that over and getting absolutely pummeled by Ben Stokes. It would have been a bad matchup, but also just romantically, if Pakistan was going to lose, he really didn't want Mohammad Nawaz to have one of his moments after what has been one of the most bizarre World Cups I've ever seen anyone have. If you look at Pakistan in this entire tournament, look, I think it's defined by them coming back from the brink. Seemingly, I suppose they lost 2 games from seemingly impossible positions, but then fought their way back into this tournament in a way that was remarkable, and maybe then eventually got them to themselves to a situation that they just couldn't wriggle out of again. They were in trouble from the first over. If you remember back to the start, Ben Stokes bowled a no ball and then a wide, and they still only took 8 runs off that first over. It just felt like they weren't ready to capitalise on any mistakes that England made. And to be fair to England, they probably didn't make that many. There was I remember there's maybe some overthrows, and at one stage Josh Buttler didn't go to the stumps for a run out chance. England just didn't make a lot of errors with their bowling or fielding. On a used surface, again, why are we using used surfaces? But anyway, they just never really got going with the bat. They were 39 for 1, and they were 137 for 8. 39 for 1 at the end of the power play, 137 for 8 they obviously got to. That they even got themselves slightly back into this game from that position just shows you, we talked about before of having one skill, and that one skill being so incredibly talented. if you look back to what Pakistan have done at times in this tournament, it really is, the ability for them to keep so much pressure on the opposition, knowing that even if you're ahead of the game against Pakistan, eventually, you're gonna, those fast bowls and Shadab are a chance of taking wickets in a bucket. Shadab, when England lost their first 3 wickets early, I thought if Shadab has one of his 2 wicket overs that he seems to be pulled out so many times when Pakistan needed it, that would have been the difference. I think if he does that, they probably win the game, and he goes on to be player of the tournament. But to be fair to Pakistan, they just made England work for it. Obviously, Alex Hales almost blew the roof off the MCG when he went out early on, and at that point, all the commentators were talking about how Pakistan looked flat. The wicket of Josh Buttler in the last over of the power play probably didn't get them ahead of the game, but certainly brought them back in it. And it's worth mentioning Naseem Shah here. Actually, we've got a video that we'll play. He bowled a fantastic wicketless spell. His 4 overs went for 30, which in this game don't look particularly good, but if you're watching it, it was magnificent. One thing I would say, and this is basically incredibly unfair, but these are the fine margins that you have. You can just see that with his length, he was just probably half a meter to a meter. I missed that then, didn't I? Sorry, everyone. You can see that he's just half a meter to a meter short. And I don't pick this out to go, oh, Naseem Shah cost them the game, because he beat the bat so many times and was fantastic. I think, being that they were defending 137, he had to be perfect. And I think that was the case, especially when Shaheen Afridi was injured. I think what they needed was everyone to be perfect. And we saw him bowl absolutely magnificent. And Harris obviously bowled magnificent as well. And Mohammad Wasim bowled some really good deliveries. Shadab bowled well. But they weren't absolutely perfect. And that's what they needed to be today. But they were pretty good anyway, right? But this is a tournament that's seen them lose to Zimbabwe and still qualifying, and needed the Netherlands to beat South Africa, and then watching it happen. And then finally, they couldn't keep coming back, I suppose. The injury to Shaheen was just the final obstacle. Obviously, Fakhar Zaman's injury perhaps might have worked out better because of how Mohammad Harris played. But at the same time, Fakhar Zaman's a pretty good player not to have in your team. There was a lot of talk about the 1992 World Cup. Because they were coming back from behind, because it was in Australia, because they ended up playing England at the MCG in the final. So lots of talk about cornered tigers, but in the end, sadly for Pakistan, they ended up in the corner. But I think the way I would look at this particular game is it was almost a contest between head and heart, skill and planning. And sadly, the accountants beat the artists in this particular game. But I think both teams played a very, very, over the last 2 World Cups, played a lot of very, very good T20 cricket. And, there were times when, Pakistan don't play a method. England played the method that works for a lot of the T20 hipsters out there. And Pakistan played basically the same method that they've been playing for a very long time in white ball cricket. And they stuck with it. And had a couple of things gone their way today, they could have won it. But England have won the World Cup, and they now hold both of them. As I said at the top of the show, Matthew Mott now holds world titles across 2 different genders as well. That's a hell of a coaching record. But that's the end of the show. I just want to say a huge that's the end of the written show. I'll come back with your questions in a moment. But I just want to say a huge thank you to Muku and Charlie for all their work on the World Cup mood board. We've had just hundreds and hundreds of thousands of viewers come through. We had no idea. There've been times when we've gone live and it said 12 people, and we're like, oh, this might have been a horrible mistake. We should have stuck with our normal videos. But I think over the time, it's been proven that you guys have really enjoyed what we've done here. So thank you to everyone who shared it, who's watched, who's commented, and everything else. But huge thanks to Charlie, who'd never really done anything like this before, and I tried to break his brain and make him do it. And a big thanks to Muku, who, obviously does brilliant work on this channel all the time. And so I decided to test him and try and break him physically. But huge thanks to both of them. I'm going to take a short break here, and then we'll come back and I'll do some of your questions.
You're listening to Cricket's Conversation on 99.94. Whatever your team, we have the show for you on podcast, YouTube, or on the 99.94 app. We have India, England, South Africa, West Indies, and now Sri Lanka covered. If you want to find us, the best way is to follow us on social media at 9994DM by downloading the 9994 app or Google 99.94 on podcast. We speak cricket.
All right, I got a couple of starred ones, but I didn't get a chance to star enough. Sorry, look, you're sending me messages, of which are very important, but I didn't get a chance to read anyway. Sorry, Muka. Adam said, always helps if I put them up on the screen. How will Adil Rashid be judged in terms of England's greatest spinners due to the country slant towards Test cricket? Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think he has a weird relationship with English cricket in general. That brief Test comeback was quite interesting, of course. Being involved in the Yorkshire hearings, I suppose, and report. As I said, I always thought that he was treated very poorly when he was a fantastic cricketer early on as well. So where do you compare him? There haven't been a lot of great English spinners since World War II, of course. They've had a couple. And so where does he rate with them? It's really interesting. I would think now, especially with that performance and what he's done for the white ball team, that he's not far away from perhaps being on that Graham Swan level. But, Graham Swan was the main spinner when they got to the top of the Test rankings. So I don't know where he ends up, but I do think that England cricket, when they look back, I think they'll realize how many good years they missed of him as well. And also he could have been a slightly better player for them. I remember when they picked Graham Swan in whenever it was, 2009 or 10, for that first time when he went over to India. I wrote an article going, what? Why are you not picking Adil Rashid then? And it did feel like, for many different reasons, partly England don't understand leg spin, but there were certainly other issues there when it came to Adil Rashid that he didn't get the go that he deserved. But I think now he's probably cemented his place in that sort of upper echelon. It'd be interesting to see what he does. I mean, I'm not saying he's going to retire now, but it will be interesting to see what he does when he retires, whether he's someone who moves into coaching, because I think that as much as he's done on the field, if he can continue to stay with English cricket and, so far, quite often with England, they have to recruit their spin bowling coaches and those sorts of people. And I think he's a really important figure from that perspective of not just as a player, but what he does next. Because someone asked about this the other day, like when he leaves, who do you replace him with? And it's not that obvious of where they go to next. They don't seem to rate Parkinson in that way. So I really hope that he sticks around and really continues to work with the next, even if it's not as England coach, whatever he does, that he continues to impart the knowledge. I think he was a very undervalued player for a very long time. And you see him take a wicket maiden in a World Cup final. And, I hope that cements him in that sort of upper echelon of, he's not Laker. There's a few very, very good spinners that England have had, but he should be in that sort of top 5, top 6 level, I think, going ahead. Who else have we got here? DM95 says, how would you feel to be Joss Butler? You're arguably the best white ball player in the world. I just captain your country's World Cup glory, and the commentators call you Josh. I was thinking about this. My son was watching with me, and he said, "Oh, that's Joe Butler. That's Josh Butler. That's Joss Butler," and it seems to be a name that just tricks people. Don't get me started on Pat Cummins, and people still call him Ravi Ashwin on TV coverage as well. So there's a lot of that out there. But yeah, I did think that. Isn't there There is a NBA player called Fred Van Vliet. I think that's his name. I hope I've got it right and not wrong. It's a really tricky one phonetically, and people quite often get that one wrong as well. And so there are obviously names that just confuse people more than they should. But I'm with you, DM. I'm pretty sure I also heard someone call him Josh today. How much better does he need to be Joss? I don't know. A little bit better. A neutral guy says, how is England better than the West Indies in the power hitting? How come England don't collapse like the West Indies? What are they doing right? So I think they have collapsed like the West Indies at times. I think that the West Indies, a lot of their early success came before teams were experts in matchups, playing dimensions of field, playing to weaknesses of players. But the other main difference is, I don't know how many first class hundreds Chris Wokes has, but there are people in Birmingham who will tell you that Chris Wokes could be a top order first class batter. England have probably batted him as high as 6 in a test match. There's a big difference between that and Akil Hassan and Obed McCoy, right? Obed McCoy's got a great eye and can hit through the line. Akil Hassan has changed his batting magnificently, and Sunil Narine as well. But they are still very limited players who are very good at hitting. And I think, so when you're talking about England, you do have a depth of talent further down the batting, but I do think facilities play a big difference too. I think the West Indies at 99.94 were talking. I can't remember who the coach was, but he was saying that young West Indian players can't hit through the line as comfortably because the pitches aren't as good. And so even if they have those skills available to them, and this is something we've talked about with Muhammad Issam on Red Inca before as well, you have a situation where the Bangladeshi players don't feel comfortable hitting through the line, and then they finally get on a flat pitch, and a lot of them just don't have that innate ability to trust it. England batters, especially the guys who come through probably the public schooling system where the batting pitches are incredible. I used to play club cricket in England, and the pitch that we used for the thirds was the same pitch that Australia and South Africa have used for warm-ups, for training. Right? It's like a thirds club game playing on a random school ground. And the pitch, and I remember the first time I played on it, it was like playing on a test pitch. It was incredible. And so there's a lot of those guys grow up with incredible facilities and synthetic pitches now as well, for some of the trainings, and a lot of throwdowns, just hitting through the line. And I do think that is a big advantage, but I do think the depth of batting talent is far deeper and wider in England than it ever has been in the West Indies. But what we had in West Indies was probably people who unlocked it early on and worked out how to do it very well. But if you go back, a lot of West Indies' best performances at World Cups was backed up by someone like Marlon Samuels basically going it around or on a ball. So they were even slightly more defensive and looked at things in a slightly different way than England did. I think England's attack percentage was higher. I haven't looked at this in a while, but because it does fluctuate. But there was a long period where England were attacking more balls than the West Indies were, but their batters were a little bit more rounded and had the ability to put more pressure on, whereas the West Indian batters were waiting for the ball to be in their area and then going for it. And when bowlers stopped bowling in their areas, they got to a point where they weren't as good at consistently scoring where England did. But there's a lot of different factors, I think, that have played in. That Pro 40 thing I was talking about before, neutral guy, I think is really important as well. I think what the Pro 40 competition did in England for a lot of the guys who are now, star batters in this tournament for England is allowed them to score long innings, but still have to score quite quick. And if you look at that, where they dominated one-day games, it was really between overs 10 and 40 was where they were completely radically different to everyone else. And they have really, and no other team in the world, Australia's tried it and hasn't been able to do it. India flirted with it a little bit, but still didn't fully commit to it. The ability to attack consistently while also, not allowing dot ball pressure and not worrying about your wickets is something that England is the only white ball team across both formats who do it consistently well. And even the West Indies, if you look at it, I'm not sure they ever did it consistently well, but when they nailed it and when they got their full team together for World Cups, they were magnificent. But I'm not sure if you look in between if they were doing it. And the fact that the West Indies haven't been able to do it in one-day cricket, I think tells you the level of difference in the overall batting quality between those two sides. All right, what else have we got? There is literally a million questions. Look. Oh, sorry. Did that wrong. Gibran says, in terms of this game, if one team has a batting strength and one team has a bowling strength, is the game won or lost during the two strengths facing off or both teams' weaknesses? I don't think it's ever quite that clear. Like, I know what you're trying to say. I did think when the toss happened today, and I did, there was a part of me that thought, well, this is going to be interesting because it's weakness versus weakness and then strength versus strength. But if you think about it from how close Pakistan was to winning this game. If Pakistan had won the toss, their bowlers on this pitch would have been really interesting first up. If Shaheen Afridi had been fully fit, they still could have pulled something off at the end. They certainly didn't get smashed out of the game, right? They almost did, but not quite with the bowling. So if you think about it from this perspective, let's say if we're doing a rating out of 100, like if we're like playing FIFA or something, right? We had to rate the teams. So Pakistan's bowling might be a 92, right? And England's batting might be an 88. And then England's bowling might have been, probably coming into this tournament, would have been maybe an 80. And they maybe, with Sam Curran pulling off the death, they probably go up to, I don't know, 83 or something. And Pakistan's batting in this tournament probably starts at like an 83 or an 84. And then the fact their openers didn't quite fire as much as they wanted to, maybe slips down a little bit, right? It's not as if it's just weak. It's not like a clear cut situation where you're going up against each other. And also, you've then got matchups. So England are the only team, it frustrates me when I watch teams play England in white ball cricket when they start to defend against them, right? It's like, generally, if England starts to roll, there's very little you can do to negate them scoring more runs than your batters are going to be able to score, right? The only team that can do that is a team that can take consistent wickets, right? You want the fresh players coming in all the time. You want no one being able to, for all the talk about how England players come in and attack, still, but Butler likes a little bit of time, right? Liam Livingston and Moeen Ali are slightly different, but most of their batters like a little bit of time. Milan likes a little bit of time to be able to do that. If you can consistently get wickets, it's not like they've got a team of Luke Ronkeys who are going to all have a strike rate of 160 after 5 balls, right? So I do think that you can put a little bit of pressure on them. So particularly, you're talking about strength versus strength, but you're also saying maybe Pakistan's strength was slightly higher than England's strength. But in that particular case, it's then about how those two things match up against each other. So we know that Pakistan can take extra wickets, but sometimes their economy rate can get away from them. You look at Naseem Shah today, we can all say he bowled brilliant, but he still went for runs in what was a fairly low scoring game. And so I think, not a lot of runs, but it wasn't like he ended up with 20 runs from his 4 overs or anything like that. And so it's not as straightforward as just looking at it from that perspective, because it's about how they match up. And if you look at England's weakness is their bowling lineup, but what they are fairly good at is generally taking wickets. Now, part of that is obviously when they had Jofra Archer back in the day, but Adil Rashid is quite good at taking wickets in the middle. Their seam bowlers generally take wickets, and in this particular tournament, Sam Curran's been doing that. Pakistan is a team that can't afford to lose too many wickets because they don't have a deep batting lineup. So it really is about how those individual bits play off against each other. So Roshif says, is England the only team that understands T20 power play batting? I think the easy thing to say, I'll tell you a story from when I was working with Melbourne Stars. We were playing in the Big Bash final, and we had decided to go in with an extra bowler. And I was against it. And the reason I was against it is because I thought I left our batting very thin. When we ended up keeping the Renegades down to not many runs, I can't remember what they made, but it was a really easy chaseable total for us to be able to go for. Ben Dunk and Marcus Stoinis went out to bat, but they had one eye on the fact that we were a batter short than we would normally be in that particular game. And because of that, they batted a little bit slower than they should have. Now, Ben Dunk, obviously has had some of the best Big Bash seasons ever, and Marcus Stoinis, we've just seen what he's done with Australia and what he can do when he gets his power hitting going, right? There's nothing wrong with their intent. They're both players with strengths and weaknesses. They're not like fully formed players, but they're both really good at what they do. But they looked at that batting and they slowed it down a little bit. And then eventually we lost the game, partly because when they both got out, they weren't far enough ahead of the run rate, and Renegades put pressure on, and Stars collapsed. There's a lot of teams. If you look at, if you've got Wayne Parnell at 7, if you've got, did Hasaranga bat 7 in this tournament? Maybe didn't bat 7. I'm trying to think of who. What's his name? Batted 7 for Sri Lanka. Who else? Santner at 7. Did Agar? No, Agar batted 8. But if you've got a team where your number 7 is someone that you're looking up at early on in the game and go, we don't want them to face too many balls. You know, we want them to be in a situation where they come in the last 3 overs. That has changed the way they bat. And there aren't many long batting lineups. Weirdly enough, you would say the West Indies is probably a team that had a slightly longer batting lineup, even if they didn't quite have the class of some of the other teams. But there aren't that many teams who have a number 8 who, I mean, look at Pakistan today. So I was looking at it. So Pakistan had Mohammad Wasim at 8, right? And England had Chris Jordan at number 10. Chris Jordan is, at this stage in their development, twice the batter that Mohammad Wasim is. You know, a lot of people are hoping Mohammad Wasim turns himself into a top-level batter and, well, you know, at least an all-rounder. And what we saw in this tournament was a lot of swinging. These conditions are probably a bit alien to him, and he was trying to work out what he was doing. But just on a very basic level, you know, one team's looking up and seeing Chris Jordan at 10 and Adil Rashid at 11, and the other team's looking up and seeing Mohammad Wasim at 8. And there is a real difference when you are batting and you know how deep your batting lineup is and how much you might trust your batting lineup as well. And so from a certain point, you're right. England play the T20 power play better than everyone else. But I also think that their team is able to do that. I remember there was a time when Australia were trying to copy the England method. 2018, 19. And you were watching them going, you could see the players out there thinking, we've got to score quicker. And then also the players thinking to themselves, but if we score quicker and we go out here, what's left? And I think it's that real combination that you see haunt a lot of teams out there. What will be interesting is whether teams can sort of gerrymander this new sort of longer batting lineup that allows anyone else to do it. Because we're a long way into England having had these batting lineups. And I think I said before this World Cup that I thought India had the ability, if they wanted to play, you know, a very, very long batting lineup and play in a different style. But, you know, Jadeja not playing certainly didn't help with my theory on that one. But although, you know, they still could have given it a go. And there was another team as well. You could argue that Pakistan could do it as well, but Pakistan are like, well, then we're taking away from our strength. But I don't think there's that many teams out there that feel massively confident with that. Australia went the other way. Australia were thinking about doing it in the last World Cup and this World Cup, and they ended up going completely the other direction with it and actually ending up with a bowler short. In order to do it. So instead of having the very long batting lineup, they went with a really good player at number 7 and knowing that they had a bowler short. So they're going kind of the opposite direction again to what England has gone with, which brings in its own risk. But that's why teams basically play in that particular way. Yeah, I'm sure there are plenty of us that think that, you know, there's a different way of going, but you do have to understand that, you know, you can't just say we should go harder in the power play. I think it was Sri Lanka a couple of years ago who was still going really hard in the power play. It might have been in one-day cricket or T20 cricket, I can't remember. And it just wasn't working because, you know, they were getting these blistering starts but losing 2 and 3 wickets. And then they didn't have the middle order to be able to mop that up and keep it going for them at a good rate. So they would drop off in the middle order, and by the end, you know, they'd lost too many wickets and their lower order couldn't do anything for them. So it is tricky from that perspective. Let's have a look here. All right. Let's see what else we have here. Let's look. Oh. Do you think overall that after this World Cup, teams will move to a more boundary percentage style of play? As it seems that teams who play that way can win. Well, this World Cup went the opposite way to that. I haven't looked at all of Dan Weston's work. You know, I've seen a couple of his articles, but this became an anchor World Cup, right? It became a strike rotation World Cup. It became a World Cup where you had to survive a good spell from Shaheen Afridi or Adil Rashid or one, you know, Sam Curran or whichever seam bowler, you know, Naseem Shah or whoever. It really became a different kind of World Cup. I think teams will go towards more attacking style of T20 cricket, but this was not the World Cup that really highlights that. If anything, this is a World Cup that actually went back a little bit. It regressed a little bit towards more traditional, just because the wickets weren't playing in that way. England couldn't have won this World Cup if they were trying to play a boundary percentage style of cricket. They had to win it by going back and knocking the ball around. And that's not for every game, because I think the big difference with England, which is what I talked about at the top, is the ability to. England, in some ways, are a little bit like Ben Stokes. They have the ability to go up or down and change the way that they play in a way that some other teams don't, because they have so much flexibility. You're talking about a team that has genuinely more than 5 bowling options and genuinely 9/10 batting options. That's just not a thing that other teams have. So they can be a bit more flexible in the way that they play. But there's no doubt that, as I said, in the 12th over or whenever it was, I was sitting there going, geez, after all of this, Dawid Malan might be the most important player that England could have had available to them here. And he's not there just because that was the kind of player that you had. But as a general rule, we're going to move more towards, players trying to hit boundaries more. But we're occasionally, the last 2 World Cups have probably not been those kinds of World Cups just because of the conditions. It's just been a slightly different atmosphere because of everything that's happened. And that's the one thing I would say with the World Cup is, I don't think, if I was working with a major team now, I don't think I would ever enter a World Cup with a team that could only play in one method. I think watching what has gone on in the last 2 World Cups, with the dew in the last one, and then here with the inconsistent surfaces, I really think you need to be like, okay, this is plan A, is we're going to play like this, but plan B is this, and then we need to be able to, within 2 games, completely work out a new method. So, let's have 3 or 4 backup methods that we might have available to us, and we can, use one of those. And that's sort of what I was saying about Pakistan, is they have one method, and it's absolutely a brilliant method, and it's got them not that far away from winning, 1 World Cup, perhaps even 2 World Cups. But I do wonder if they have the flexibility available needed when things change a little bit. They certainly have the talent, and they fought really hard in this tournament, and they were outstanding in the last tournament as well. But I do wonder if they have the flexibility from that point of view. Josh says, 2021 was ironically the tournament where England consistently played the best. I would say that them and Pakistan probably played better in that tournament than they did in this one. But I think they both had to develop better and overcome things a little bit more in this one, which is a slightly different a skill set that you need to go. So even if they don't go ahead, and Pakistan's got a very young core. Anyone who's been on this channel will know how much I love Shaheen Afridi. I've been talking about for a very, very long time. But there's young batters, there's young bowlers, there's talent coming through. Certainly, so I don't think they're disappearing anytime soon. England's probably a little bit more aging, but having someone like Sam Curran and Harry Brook come through, at younger ages shows that there's still a lot of it. And Jofra's quite young if they can ever get him back on the park as well. And it doesn't seem like they're having trouble producing T20 guys who can come in and biff it. So there's certainly a lot of talent coming through from both those sides. I think it'd be a really interesting tournament to talk to the players afterwards, and I think this might be one that both sets of teams probably learnt a lot from. Maybe the last World Cup wasn't as much, if that makes sense. Let's see what else we've got. Oops, sorry. Harsha says, will Sam Curran get huge bids in the IPL auction and it may backfire in Indian conditions? Well, the one thing I would say is, yes, he bowled a lot of short balls in this particular event, but he wasn't reliant on the short balls. And essentially what he did was he put a lot of revolutions on his slower balls, and then he bowled very, very straight Yorkers. I mean, why would those 2 things not transfer to India? I mean, I think he bowled really well, and obviously done a whole video on it, and really impressed with everything he's done. If you are paying a person because of what they've done in 6 games and expecting them to be able to replicate it over the next 45 games, yeah, that's how many games they've got before the next, or including finals, maybe more than that. That's not a good business model. That's not to say he won't be successful in it. There are some bowlers who, it's really hard to tell with the bowlers in Australia in general, because I would have thought that Jai Richardson would have profiled really well, and that Riley Meredith would not have profiled particularly well going over to the OPL. And Jai Richardson so far hasn't found a way to be successful over there. And Riley Meredith has probably been, all things considered, slightly better than him, even if he hasn't been a huge one. So Australian bowling conditions are so different to Asia that it's not an easy thing to look at from that perspective. All right, what else have we got? Rahul says, do you think India have the resources to start a white ball revolution like England did in 2015? Yeah, resources, not problem. Money, talent on and off the field, a good local domestic tournament. I think there are things that they could do that would make things even better. I think, they have to find a way to make sure their players are better outside of Asia. Specifically, although they lost the last World Cup in Asia as well. But, that's, I think, again, having more rounded players is always an advantage, however they manage to be able to do that. There's plenty for India to be able to do that. I don't have any problem with that. I think there's certain things I think that England was so bad, and I don't think India have been so bad. India have eventually been knocked out by the best team. Over the last two World Cups, they've, lost some games, but they haven't been terrible. I think it was easier to sweep the floor with England because there was literally Alistair Cook opening the batting. That Scotland game I was talking about before, Ian Bell and Moeen Ali made runs in that game. And my memory is, I might be slightly wrong here, but my memory is that they were slower in the second 25 overs than they were in the first 25 overs. So Moeen Ali and Ian Bell hit the ball everywhere, and then they just didn't have it to come back. And so those sorts of things, and some of the other losses they had in that tournament, and the way they played in that tournament was it was easy to be able to do. And plus, they had they had an experienced white ball player who was trusted enough to be given what he wanted, and he had a very strong vision. There are things different about the Indian setup than there are about the English setup from that perspective. Vinay says, is Muku Abhishek Mukherjee? No, he'll be off doing stuff for Wisdom today. He's the editor over there, Abhishek. Muku works with us in Pondicherry, and he's, I forget what his job title is. He'll probably send me a message. I think he's like head of my content, or Jarrod Kimber content on my channel or whatever. Absolute legend. Let's have a look who else we've got here. Just seeing if there's anything else that we can cover.
If you love the language of cricket and want more, then head over to the 99.94 app and you can hear all of our podcasts and cricket commentary. We're adding new shows all the time and covering cricket series from all over the world. Be the first to hear all of our announcements by following us on social media at 9994DM. Welcome to Cricket's Conversation.
Beautiful. All right, I've just got a couple left and then we'll finish up. C Square says, Stokes is by far a better anchor in England T20 side. I think he's found a new role. Yeah, so when he played for Rajasthan and opened up the batting, and then I can't remember sorry, C Square. And then he didn't bat. And then for England, they couldn't find a position for him, and he was batting 5 and 6 and wherever else he was in the order. We covered a lot of those games. We covered a lot of T20 internationals with TalkSport. And that was the big thing, was that Milan was in the side. And at that stage, I really don't think England particularly had warmed to him as a player, just because he wasn't playing in the way they wanted. And if they were going to move on from Milan, it just made the most sense to play Ben Stokes as a number 3 in that Milan sort of role. In the way that I thought he played best for Rajasthan. I don't think you could make him an opener just because their openers were so good from that perspective. And they could have even played him as a floating anchor and just brought him in when, shit got real. Because essentially that's, especially in white ball cricket, that's almost his main skill. He just doesn't have the ability to score at, he profiles as someone who should be like Andrew Simons, David Miller, those sorts of players, but he doesn't play like that in white ball cricket. And so his real skill is when things are going wrong, to be able to drop him into those situations. And then also you've still got someone who at least theoretically you've at least still got someone who, if he goes in the 18th over, he will swing off his ass, right? He's not going to worry about his wicket. He's going to swing that way. And so I just thought that was always a better way of using him. And I don't know how much of, I think a lot of that happened obviously because Bairstow wasn't in the side and he ended up in that position. And then obviously with Malan's injury, he's had to play the proper anchor role twice. I'm not sure how much of that was the actual plan or not. It'd be really interesting to talk to them as a team, but it ended up working perfectly for them. Harsha says, what would you say is the trend of this tournament? Well, the trend of this tournament was rain. Now, the trend of this tournament was that it was vastly different surfaces and that it was a fast bowling dependent tournament, far more than you would expect, far more than, if you've ever watched the Big Bash, they're not fast bowling tournaments the way that this particular one was. So those were the two things, that the conditions were very different from ground to ground, even more so than you would traditionally, even before we had drop-in pitches in Australia. It's very rare that you have pitches that were so different to each other because of the weather and everything else, and the early season nature of the game. So I think those were the two ones that the seam bowlers were certainly on top. You're ending up with, Baz the Leader and Paul Van Meekeren and Blessing Muslim Barney and Tuscan Ahmed, all bowling absolutely brilliant. And they did bowl brilliantly. Let's not take that away from them. But when you have so many seamers coming in and doing that well, sort of gives you an idea of what kind of a tournament it was, I think. Maverick says, how did England fit in Bairstow, Root, Malan, Wood, Archer, Topley? All right. Bairstow comes back in and bats at number 4, I would assume. Malan probably now makes way for Stokes, although, will Stokes play in the next World Cup? He probably will. But yeah, they'll be looking at it from that point of view. Archer will come in for Wokes, and Wood. Archer will come in for Wokes. Wood would come in for Jordan in this particular team, if Curran can continue to bowl as well as he has at the death. And then Topley will be a squad member. But if you remember the Dutch series, they tried about 83 left arm seamers. In fact, they might have against the West Indies as well. So from that perspective, there's certainly a lot of different options for them potentially going ahead. But that was what I think me and Rory were talking about that on the Twitter Spaces just before I came across here. So Rory's our host on England on 99.94. Might want to check out their podcast tomorrow. And I think from that perspective, I don't think we've seen England in a World Cup at full strength yet. And I don't just mean injury-wise, although, as you pointed out, there's quite a few players there when it comes to injuries. But also just from I don't think we've seen them in the 2016, 2019, 2021, you can throw 2017 in there, and now 2022. I don't think we've actually seen them at their peak performance right across the World Cup. 2021 maybe looked like the one it was going to be, but then there were so many injuries, and by the end their death bowling wasn't quite working for them, and the wet ball probably got them. But other than that, I think you've certainly got a situation I think you've certainly got a situation where England can get better. But Pakistan's a young team as well, and so they can get better. But as I said before this final, I was really happy that these two teams made it. I really think over the last year and a half, they've been the best two World Cup teams, and it was great. Thank you to everyone for coming on. We're going to call it there. I've got another video to make, probably another 100 videos to make, but we'll try and keep it as easy as possible. But yeah, it was absolutely fantastic that you all came and you asked so many questions. So thank you so much for that. And thank you to everyone who's pushed this on social media and everything else and commented, and anyone who's helped us out on Patreon, Jarrod Kimber Patreon. But we do this sort of stuff all the time. If you've just come across for the World Cup, there's probably half the time I read a comment on one of these chats, and I was like, I'm pretty sure I've done like a full 25-minute video on that topic already. So go back through all the old stuff. There's a lot of stuff there. There's also the podcast that we do on Red Inca. Now, if you like anything about the history of cricket that we dot in every now and again, a double century obviously has quite a lot on the history of cricket as well. And then there's the whole 99.94 network where, we're trying to get all the major international teams have one podcast each, and eventually we're trying to get podcasts for pretty much every cricket team in the world if we can. So the more you can support us and tell everyone about us, the better. But thanks everyone for all your questions and all your support. This is the end of the World Cup mood board. I will say thank you on behalf of Muku and Charlie as well. But continue to follow us here, and I'm sure we'll be back pretty soon. Well, actually, I'll probably have a video on England tomorrow, so we'll definitely be back pretty soon. But we'll probably be back pretty soon with whatever we're moving on to next. I'm not even sure what the next series is we'll cover, but even if we don't cover a series, we'll still be putting up 3 or 4 videos a week, as we always do. Bye for now.